Here we go. Season 7.
All aboard!
If you missed it, here's what we believe. 66 book canon. We believe in a 66 book canon. There is no more, there is no less. It's 66 books.
That Yeshua, who is preached by the apostles in the Gospels and in the epistles, is the only means of salvation, as we would call him, Yeshua means.
In other words, justification is by faith alone and not by works that any man should boast.
Faith working through love.
We are unashamedly Trinitarian. We're also unashamedly believe in the doctrines of grace, what is commonly referred to as Calvinistic.
The new covenant is not time bound. That is to say that the horizon of the faith of our father Abraham is no different.
Right.
It is not shy of the horizon of our hope and our faith.
In other words, that salvation was the same for Abraham as it is for us.
Right.
It is Wednesday, February 19th, 2020. This is Messiah Matters number 289, making it up as we go along. My name is Caleb Hegg.
And also making it up as we go along.
You can tell the production values.
I love that. That music just makes me want to dance, man. We need people who are skilled with dance to choreograph the Messiah Matters dance that goes with that song.
No doubt. I still think that the idea of having a one of our shows, I had a dinner party one time. I forget who it was. I'm sure they'll remind me now. But I think it was people from my church. They said that they were going to take audio from one of our shows and then make puppets of you and me and do the whole, re-video the whole show with puppets.
That would be awesome. Or even a little clip. Oh, man.
Yeah, that would be really funny. Of course, good puppets are hard to come by. And good puppeteers. We've been messing with the sound all morning long, so I don't know if it's too loud, too soft, whatever. Chat room, you're going to have to let me know.
That makes me laugh.
Yeah, wouldn't that be good?
Little puppets.
Or big puppets.
We talked about doing a show that was like Rob and Caleb Mystery Science Theater 3000, but it's like
so funny.
We watch like a clip of some teacher, and you see our
just silhouettes.
Corner. You see our silhouettes, and we look at each other and we talk about it. It's like we're in the back row.
Did he say "holy cows"?
Wait a minute. Did he just say that?
The ideas we have. So speaking of ideas that we have, today is not. We've had 2 weeks to think about this show. We have nothing. We don't have nothing, but we almost have nothing. We have next to nothing. We have next to nothing to talk about. It's been a whirlwind.
We have a world to talk about, but we have not prepared. We should say
it's not just that. We just really don't have topics. We don't have good topics.
About a lot of stuff.
Here's the problem: is that we have been in the office here. We have been working so hard to get this new site up and running. Now, when it switches over, the people who go to it will probably be like, "Okay, I don't even see really a big difference or whatever," but it's huge. Anyway, every waking second has been, I was laying in bed last night for 2 hours, couldn't get to sleep. What was I thinking about? The website, the launch. Like, let's launch this thing and get it going. I don't know. As soon as we launch this site, I think what we're going to have to do is have like a behind the scenes Q&A for our supporters. So
that'd be cool. Hey, so I'm going to kick us off.
Kick us off, bro.
For once.
Do it.
I'm going to grab the
mic.
Step up to the helm, grab the mic here. Okay. So I want to do a book review.
Do it.
It's not really a review, but Ben Noonan, Dr. Benjamin J. Noonan, good friends of Torah Resource, he and his wife, Jennifer.
We love them, by the way. They are just
Yeah,
Dr.
they're
and Dr.
amazing.
Noonan. We've talked
Dr.
about
and
them
Dr.
before. They're just absolutely fantastic people.
Anyway, and they just got back from Egypt. They did a private, I think they did it was a small group tour of Egypt with Dr. James Hoffmeyer, who I believe grew up there. Could you imagine that? I mean, I'm like, I want to go. Anyway, we're celebrating Dr. Noonan's new book published by Zondervan Academic, and it is Advances in the Study of Biblical Hebrew and Aramaic. Here's kind of a dark shot of it. Advances in the Study of Biblical Hebrew and Aramaic. And this is
Dr.
amazing.
Noonan, by the way, we should just mention, Dr. Noonan graciously, without any prompting at all, sent both our office and Rob a copy of his book.
Yeah, I got a signature on mine. I'll even show you.
Stellar.
Right there, man. He gets into, well, I'll cite Dr. Noonan himself here. This is from the beginning of his conclusion, but he kind of, just in one short passage, conveys the purpose of this book. He says, I began this book by presenting an all too common dilemma. So there's a dilemma behind the production of this book. What's the dilemma? The study of biblical Hebrew and biblical Aramaic, and this is going to hold true for biblical Greek also, is necessary for those who want to interpret the Hebrew Bible or the apostolic writings for Greek faithfully. But those reading the Hebrew Bible in its original languages face difficulty in grasping the linguistic study of the Hebrew Bible. So in this book, I've sought to remedy this problem by providing an accessible introduction to the world of biblical Hebrew and biblical Aramaic scholarship. My aim is that this book will introduce students, pastors, professors, scholars to current issues of interest on these languages so that they know why these issues are important for understanding the Hebrew Bible. And he has a Luther citation here, which is really good. Luther says this in his to the councilman of all cities. He says, we will not long preserve the gospel without the languages. If through our neglect we let the languages go, which God forbid, we shall lose the gospel. So Dr. Noonan is presenting this book, and it's a good-sized book. I mean, it's over 300 pages. And each chapter addresses things like lexicography, verbs, word order, dialect issues between North and South, different Semitic languages being used or non-Semitic languages being used, teaching biblical Hebrew. Each of these are chapters that dive in, and then once you're in a chapter, he takes you through multiple perspectives that are pushed out there by different top scholars. It's an amazing resource to have. And his point is, on the simple front, a person growing up saying, I want to go into ministry, I want to study Bible languages because I want to be able to read Greek or Hebrew and I want to be able to translate it. And that's a good goal. But once you step across that line and you start learning, you start to realize there's a huge world that you're slowly reorienting yourself to. And there's a whole history of people who've gone in before you who've made important observations and leaps and bounds in education and how to understand Hebrew. And we all benefit from all those labors of people. Now he'll contrast different views in one chapter. In one chapter he'll say this scholar says this about dialect or dating manuscripts. Like one big issue is the dating of the Aramaic of Daniel. Popular liberal scholarship today put Daniel in the Maccabean era. They put it in the middle 2nd century BC. But there's also scholars that say, wait a minute, it's totally Persian period, right? So he'll present contrasting views and this helps the person coming into this field get a sense of the territory, get a sense of of the terrain of what it means to think inside the biblical Hebrew world in an effort to not just stay there, but an effort to be better at understanding God's word and then communicating it to people, the layman or whoever's out there, depending on the teachers. And one of the things it highlights is that we, on the internet, on YouTube, there's people who don't really know Hebrew that are teaching Hebrew.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's people who are teaching like Hebrew word pictures and all sorts of stuff. And it's like, man, I would like to see them even try to understand anything that's in Dr. Noonan's book. They should read it. They should read it and realize, man, I got to go to school. It's not a light thing, right?
So the book that just in case anyone is interested, the book that we have been talking about, or that Rob has been talking about, is Advances in the Studies of Biblical Hebrew and Aramaic. It's published by Zondervan 2020 by Dr. Benjamin J. Noonan. Find it, 336 pages. Find it online. It's all over the internet now. And if you have any interest in this kind of a study, I would obviously recommend it. Dr. Noonan is just a treasure. And so is his family. Anyway, okay. And not just his mother as well is a treasure. Just wonderful people all around.
And they're great friends of Torah Resource too.
Okay. Yeah, great friends of Torah Resource. Evelyn asks, Caleb, is your study on the Eucharist aligning with your father's article, Investigation of the Lord's Table? It's been a very long time since I've read my father's work on the Lord's Table. I believe that it is aligning with that because we both take a historical, grammatical interpretation of things. I would assume that it's aligning with it, but I think that the scope of the paper that my father wrote is a very different, it's in a very different focus of study than what I'm doing. At least maybe I shouldn't say that. Up until this point, it has been. I've written about 70 to 75 pages on the Last Supper, essentially. I just entered into 1 Corinthians. And I think that for the layman, for the average person, I'm going to be too over technical and wordy, and there's going to be a lot to bite off and chew. For anyone who has has studied the issues that I'm talking about before, they will think that I'm highly under studied in what I'm presenting. And I think that's just because there's so much to the arguments. I could just keep, I could go and go and go and go and go. And I mean, there's so many different elements. I've had to reorient my own mind probably 9 or 10 times on what am I actually trying to write about here. And the reason why is because there's so many elements to it. Am I writing about Greco-Roman meals in the first century? Yes. Okay. Well, then what does that have to do with the Last Supper? And then how does the Last Supper fit it? There's just so many elements, even down to, one of the rabbit trails I went on was the idea of Codex Beza or Beze, however people want to say it. And the idea that the Western text, there's a variant in Luke 22:19. Now I'm getting into some pretty technical things here, but basically the phrase "do this in remembrance of me" is not in the Western text in D and the other manuscripts of D. And so the question is why? Well, I just wrote an entire section on why, what different scholars say. So for instance, Bart Ehrman says, well, it was added by the Orthodox because, for various reasons. There's no good reason why it would be taken out. And so a lot of my research actually came down to what do I actually think happened? What do I think is, okay, I don't think that it was taken out, or I don't think it was put in by the Orthodox. I think it was taken out by the Western Church. But
that makes sense.
But then the question,
but that's a unique position you're taking. It sounds like after talking to Dr. Ehrman, right?
Well, yes and no. It is so there's another guy.
Your rationale is unique.
Yes. Well, Billings, there's a guy named Billings who wrote an entire dissertation on Codex D and why it may have been taken out. Now he says, we're on this is what happens when we don't have anything prepared.
No, this is all good.
He says that it was taken out because of persecution due to in France, because Codex D was we believe it was written in Lyon. So in Lyon there was a lot of persecution against Christians, and he suggests that people believed that the Christians were cannibalistic, and that the Eucharist was seen as cannibalistic. Eat my body, drink my blood. And so it was taken out of the text due to persecution. Now, I have a different view than Billings, and it's a view that I have not seen anywhere, nor do I believe it has ever been written before, which is always scary. Anytime you have something that's never been written before, you know you're going to get slaughtered by everyone. So, but honestly, who's really going to read my stuff? Except for like Rob and my father, and I mean, I'm sure that the people in the chat room will be like, "Hey, can we get a copy of that?" And I'll make it available for you. But the point is, it's taking so long to write because the amount of research that I've had to put in to do it has been just painstaking. And not only that, but there's also the question of, do I just stop doing everything else? Currently I'm in a full-on study on the Trinity and the formation of the doctrine of the Trinity, and when did it all start, and all these kind of things. And so this specific study has been really, really, really good for me because I've been able to understand much better how all these things came about, and my own theology. I've been able to expand my own theology on what I believe in terms of who God is and the way that he interacts with people. So currently I'm reading 7 books, and they're all on the Trinity. And at the same time, I got like 8 books behind me, all on 1 Corinthians that I got to try to wrap my head around so that I can actually make an effort in 1 Corinthians. Of course, I can't write on the entire book of 1 Corinthians.
So, Caleb, I want to ask you a question based on what Dr. Noonan, how he framed his book. Is like, look, you enter into this world, and people have gone before you, and they don't all agree.
Yeah.
And what do we do in that situation? And now he's focused on language, but what I hear you talking about is that it's the same thing, whether you're going to start talking about how to understand the Last Supper, or if you're talking about 1 Corinthians, which of course they do tie together. But my question to you is, how come you can't just be interested in the things you're interested in and just sit down with like a King James Bible and write your book?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. And the reason why is because if you just
someone could just say the Bible's enough, man. Why do you need all those stuff?
Yeah, well, I mean, the Bible is enough, but the question is what do we understand the Bible to be? So, for instance, if I open up the KJV, first of all, I don't realize that there's a variant in Luke 22:19. So the idea, first of all, any of the study that we've done on manuscript studies, and I mean, half of my study into the Western text and Codex D was trying to understand where that codex was written and what surrounding it was written in. In other words, like for instance, okay, I'll give you an example. For my personal view on the variant in Codex D on Luke 22:19, it matters an extreme amount whether or not, like, my conclusion would have to be.
Let's pull up that verse. While you're it's Luke, what is it?
22:19.
22:19. I'll keep talking and I'll just pull it up.
So my conclusion on my entire idea of this variant hinges on where this is written. If it's written in Jerusalem, if Codex D is written in Jerusalem, which it wasn't, by the way, but if it were, then my conclusion would have to be 100% opposite from what my conclusion is. I can't tell you what my conclusion is yet because I haven't written it fully and whatnot. But if it's written in Lyon, in France, in a specific time period, 3rd to 4th century, now all of a sudden it's completely different than if it was written in Jerusalem in the 3rd or 4th century.
Okay, so the verse just for those for the uninitiated. What Caleb's talking about is in Luke 22:19. It's the middle of the Passover, of the Last Supper. And verse 19 says, "And he," that is Yeshua, "he took bread. When he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, 'This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me.'"
Right.
And what Caleb's point is that Codex D, lacks the whole verse or just the last part of it?
Oh man, I'd have to look at my work. I think it actually might even lack a little bit before that.
Okay, so basically this phrase
I think
is
it's all of 19 and part of 18.
right. And Codex D is from the 400s, right? It's a what we call a 5th century manuscript that has the Gospels and Acts for the most part. I mean, it was a book that had the Gospels and Acts together.
That's right.
And that it's missing a core part of this this phrase.
So
Caleb's saying that's super important because the core question is, should that be in the Bible or not? And you're making the point that if all I had was the King James Bible,
I wouldn't even
know that there was a variant there.
Exactly.
And what Caleb's talking about is that a level of scholarship where we need to have a higher bar of accountability so that we search matters out very, very thoroughly, which means I can't just take what a bunch of men in England decided 500 years ago in printing a Bible in the English language as the be-all, end-all. It's an important milestone, but we need to trace and see how did they come to the decisions they made. There's kind of a judicial review, but then you're going back and say, wow, in the 500 years since the King James Bible was produced and printed, we have how many thousands of manuscripts now that were not accessible to them. So we have way more light, way more information, and this is one area.
Here's how much information we have. Check this out. My father gave me this book when I first started my studies in the Eucharist. It's called 100 Years of Study on the Passion Narratives.
Wow.
And you would think, okay, this sounds like an interesting book. It's not actually a book. It's a bibliography. Everything is just entries of different papers, books, and lectures that have been given so that you can reference. The whole book is like that.
So that's when you can't sleep in the middle of the night and you want some reading.
It's not reading. It's
I know.
It's like, okay, you have a topic. Let's say this text, the Passion of Jesus in non-canonical works. Okay. And by the way, by the time he gets to this, there's 2,154 entries already. So I have over 2,000 entries of different papers and books that I can look up. But the point is I'm never going to get to all that.
Right.
So it's not like, I'm going to read everything that's been written on this. No, there's no way.
This is why, and we get in this in our theological research and writing class that I have the privilege to do. It's like everything's interesting. Every entry in that book is going to be interesting. So we're not going for interesting. We're not going because we could just spend the rest of our life just reading those articles and never do anything. So if it's all interesting, what are we doing when we're doing theological research and writing? We need to move beyond the sea of interesting for purposeful, purposeful hypothesis. Like, in other words, you got to have an argument drive your research. And then once you know, and now it doesn't mean you know exactly what your argument is, but you have what's a working hypothesis and you work with it. And then you go, and that is your filter device to divide from the sea of interesting into things that are actually relevant to what you're working on. But anyway,
let's move, because I feel like we've gotten into some interesting things, but they're not exactly where we were planning on starting.
From the
chat room is actually having a conversation about that we're going to have in a few minutes. But let's start with this, because I thought this was really interesting. We got this morning. Rob has not heard this, by the way. And, okay, let's just read it. My husband and I are seeking wisdom on business opportunity to take over a butcher shop and / meat processing shop in our local town. The current owner is a longtime friend who and fellow believer, but not Torah observant, that is ready to retire. My husband thinks this would be a great opportunity, but is having a crisis of conscience as one who eats according to God's dietary laws. He knows that he would be butchering and processing pork. This would not concern him as much if he were doing this for people who are not in covenant relationship with the Lord. However, he knows that it will be However, he knows that there will be believers coming into him that are not following the dietary laws and want their pork processed. Again, they are in covenant with God through Messiah, but are not Torah observant. Do you have any thoughts on this? P.S. Here's the passage we are praying about in Scripture, Deuteronomy 14:21. You should not eat anything that dies on its own. You may give it to the stranger who is in your city, so that he may eat it, or you may sell it to the foreigner, since they are not under foreigner, but you are people holy to the Lord your God. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. Yeah.
Right, and that's a good verse. You want to read that in conjunction with the parallel in Leviticus. And Tim Haig's book, Fellow Heirs, opens with the treatment of the Deuteronomy 14 and the Leviticus. Is it 17? Sorry, I don't remember. Leviticus 21, maybe, I don't remember. Anyway, there's a parallel in Leviticus, and the question is, the word ger is used in both.
Right.
And one, the ger is just as unclean as the Israelite, and they both have to wash. That's the Levitical. Whereas if they eat it, in other words, the same, there's no different consequence, and the obligation is both for the native and the ger in Leviticus. Whereas in Deuteronomy, it uses the word ger along with the whatever ben nohri or whatever, the foreigner. And so that shows that, and we see this time and again, one word can have a couple different meanings, and
right.
We need to look at context. That's an interesting thing. I know what my opinion is. If you jump in, don't process pork. You know what I mean? I mean that's what I would say.
I think that there's three options here. I don't think that one of them is necessarily right and one of them is wrong. And there's an ultimate final hook on these answers. I think that one is, you're going to be owning a meat processing, butchery. And so you can either not process pork, which I know sounds ridiculous, right? It sounds like no butcher shop is ever going to make it like that. However, if God wants you to make it, not processing pork, then you will make it. I've had people and friends who have said, my job absolutely will not let me have Saturdays off. There's just absolutely no way. Everybody's got to do it. And then, you say, well, okay, well, pray about it or trust in the Lord. And they go tell their boss, I'm taking Saturdays off. If I get fired, I get fired. And somehow they're the one person in the company that gets Saturdays off. You know what I mean? Like the Almighty whatever the Almighty wills is what can happen. So obviously, if you own a butcher shop that doesn't process pork, if the Lord wills it to work, it'll work. Especially if you smoke some really good brisket or something. Anyway, the other option is that you obviously sell pork, and then you don't discriminate. Consider that it's up to the other person or to the person that is coming in. It's not up to you whether or not that person might go get pork if they don't get it from you, they're getting it from someone else. So, that might be a rationale as well. The other option is that you go into a different business. However, all three of those options are not for me and you to weigh in on. This comes down to ask your local pastor. If you should be part of a community, and ultimately, this is something that you should pray about with your community and discuss with your leaders.
So it sounds to me, it's interesting. That's a good way to look at it, Caleb. It's not that he's buying pigs and slaughtering them and selling. It sounds like people bring him animal that's already been slaughtered and he cuts it up
I would
for
assume
them,
that
or
if you go to a butcher shop and you ask for a slab of bacon, that they're going to have it.
yeah.
In other words, I think that the butcher is, you know,
Well, another issue would be if are they going to be open on the Shabbat? Like, in other words, if you're going to decide, yeah, we're gonna we're not going to sell pork, but we'll be open on weekends or something. I mean, this is it's a
oh,
question.
Jason in the oh wow, listen to this, Jason in the chat room. This is an interesting comment. I work in sales, entertainment, cable TV, and internet. I wouldn't sell adult entertainment to a customer if they asked. They're both sin. Okay, fair point. Good point. However, the question is, if you're selling internet to somebody and they're surfing the net for porn,
You can't control.
you
right,
can't
that
control
part.
that. Now, I know that Jason could come back and say, well, yeah, but you're actually giving them the pork. I mean, ultimately, once again, I think that this comes down to this is a community issue. I think that, I mean, would I do it? I don't think so.
And I'm glad that they have a scripture that they're focused on. It says, "You shall be holy." So that's going to be part of that conversation. Is what does it mean for us to be holy before Him and to love Him with all our heart, all our soul, and all our strength? And if He's given you an opportunity, if He's blessed you with some capital that you are able to invest, and you're looking for an investment opportunity, maybe this is not your. Maybe there's another thing He's going to show you, another path for you to grow and invest in a productive way that would be a blessing for your family and for those people you serve through that business. That would just be in a different avenue. But boy, yeah, that's a good question. Thanks for sending it in.
I think you're in a little bit of a conundrum here in terms of, what you want to do and how you want to do it. The fact that you're convicted about it tells me something, which is good. But the other thing is, the unfortunate part is that the unfortunate fact is that the likelihood of this person being in a biblical community where the pastor's going to say, I have a very strong opinion one way or the other, I keep kosher and this is what I think on this, is probably, that's probably not what's going on here. And so this comes down to, what do you think the Lord is leading you to do? Would I slaughter pork and sell it in my shop? I have to say, personally, I don't think I would do that. Let me rephrase. Personally, I wouldn't do that. That's me personally. I'm not a leader in this person's community, whoever this person is. I'm not a spiritual leader, and so I hesitate to try to give advice on something like this. That seems to be something that should be a matter of a community conversation. And if you were in a big enough community, if you got 200 or 300 people in a community, that would be another conversation for the community too. If I open a butcher shop that doesn't slaughter pork, would you buy from me even if it's a little bit more expensive? I don't know. And, I don't know.
One other bit, though, too, just back to the Deuteronomy 14. It's not talking about unclean animals. It's not talking about pork. It's talking about eating animals that would normally be acceptable, but they died on their own.
Right.
So the applicability, I guess, just from one other angle before we move on, is just that the applicability of Deuteronomy 14:21 would be, I have a business, I process meat, kosher, or what do you call it, biblically or acceptable meats, and sometimes people bring in an animal that's already dead and they want me to cut it up and sell it or something. That seems to be a place where Deuteronomy 14:21 would be more applicable. But it's not talking about people who ate pork, that you should sell it. That's not what it's talking about. It's talking about animals that would be acceptable under normal situation that have died of their own. In other words, it's a cow that was killed by, let's say it got maimed or something, and then it died. And then they're like, what do we do? Do we eat it? So, good question.
If you've never had beef bacon, it's so good. You got to try it. I agree. There, I mean, it's
Caleb treated me to some beef bacon.
yeah.
That was, you said it was like a buck a slice or something.
Yeah.
It was spendy stuff.
It's super, but
it was thick.
Where we get it, it's like this long, and
really
it's like
thick.
this thick when it comes out of the package. And you put, oh man, and my wife loves it because she loves to eat it, but she hates it because I don't just cook enough strips for like everyone to have one or two. I can eat an entire bag of that stuff to myself. And so like I'm cooking up like 2 or 3 bags of it, and it's expensive. I think we get like 8 slices for $8.
Wow. Yeah.
But oh man, is it worth it? And here's the thing: once you have beef bacon, turkey bacon tastes like you're eating cardboard. It is the worst.
God.
I can't do it anymore. People are like, "Oh, we're having turkey bacon." I'm like, "Thank you. You go ahead." You know, there's a place here in Tacoma. It's a Southern dining place. The lady is a Christian. She decided that she wasn't going to have any pork in her entire establishment. She does Southern cooking. This was featured, by the way, on Dives, Drives, and Dine-Ins or whatever it was. Anyway,
Wow. She does well.
her beef bacon is on point. I'll tell you that much. Okay, let's go on. Now, the chat room has already had this discussion, so, I mean, do we really need to? But let's.
I don't know. I haven't.
Is making or possessing an image of the Father or the Son biblically acceptable? This is an entire part of church history called the iconoclast disputes. What do you think, Rob? What side of the aisle do you fall on, brother?
I see, like, I don't know. I might have a book. You know, I think I've got a. Oh, I know. There's like a Lego Bible. I don't know if I have a copy of it or not. I don't remember. But it's.
I have it.
Or the Minecraft Bible. I know Ben has that one. Okay.
Yeah.
So or cartoons. I did have it. I got it in Israel. I got a little cartoon gospel thing with Hebrew, you know, little bubble people talking to each other. Okay. So is that what it's talking about? Or, you know, I know people that are of the Orthodox faith, the Christian Orthodox, and they have icons, you know, throughout their house. And that, frankly, that creeps me out.
Yeah.
So I'm okay with the cartoon and the little Lego Moses or whatever, but, and you know, I'm okay with, like, on Shabbat, kids have little coloring pictures of Moses in the Red Sea or whatever, you know, parting the waters, and they color it.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. But when there's a theology of iconography, which is in the Eastern Orthodox, or the what do you call it, Greek Orthodox, where it's like there's a halakha. You can learn all about this, of like, they don't use the word halakha, but there's a way what makes an acceptable icon. It has to do with the eyeball and the iris, whether the iris can touch the eyelid or not, and how the skin tones are, because they have a theology of presence. They believe that the presence of the icon somehow mediates the presence of that saint or figure. That's, to me, when you start doing that, that's weird. But some of them argue that they look at ancient Jewish synagogue mosaics and argue, oh, Jews did it too. But those are all Byzantine. Those are all
not only that, but I hate to be the bearer of bad news for everyone. Israel has not been the model of
yeah, they also have zodiac
monotheism.
They also have giant zodiacs on their synagogue floor too.
Yeah, exactly.
With like Helios so.
I mean, I'm not trying to put Israel down, but if start from coming over the Red Sea.
But from that, they're thinking, oh, this has Jewish roots, and so that it lends legitimacy in their eyes. But I think it gives me the creeps in the same way that at a Catholic church you see the stations of the cross or whatever, and they're supposed to pray at each one. To me, that's nonsense. It's just,
there's a lot I got to talk about here, because you've brought up so many different things. First of all, when it comes to kids' Bibles, so my family has gone on a quest to find a good kids' Bible. We have the Action Bible, we have the Lego Bible, we have the Minecraft Bible, and we have about 4 or 5 other Bibles.
There's like a surfer's Bible too now.
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of different stuff. But we have all these different Bibles that are geared towards children. First of all, let me tell you, Do not think that just because it's a child's Bible, that theology has not been determined while it's being written. In fact, if you look at things now, I don't know what side people are going to come down on. I think it's either in the Minecraft Bible or the Lego Bible. It might be the Lego Bible. The person has obviously tried to intertwine things like evolutionary model versus creationist model from the very beginning. The theology is really bad. So you have to kind of pick and choose what you're going to read to your child in that Bible. And as weird as that sounds, it's just how it is. So be very leery. Don't just grab one of those Bibles and think that you're going to be able to, read it to your child straight through. It's not like that. You actually got to pick and choose. When it comes to the what are they called? The icons I tend to be fascinated with monasteries. So I've tried to watch every single documentary that ever comes along on various monasteries. I saw one, and I don't know why. I think it's just the absence of, or maybe just such a simple life of prayer that is very attractive, but at the same time, I don't think it's biblical. Anyway, I came across one, and there was a lady, a nun, and her only job was to make those. And she was like one of the great icon makers. And she was like certified by the church to make these icons.
Yeah. She's like a coach. She's like a hexer.
Yeah, exactly. She knows how
like
to
who made someone comes to your house and you're like,
who made that? Who made your St. Thomas?
Oh, that's a Mrs. Johnson St. Thomas. Oh, I like this house. Kids, go ahead. You can play.
Yeah. You can pray to this image. I think the Bible is so clear that images are not supposed to be used in worship. Even Yeshua, no stately form or majesty that we should look upon. In fact, one time...
And what happened with we know from the example of the serpent, bronze serpent, that in Kings, we read about how they had set it up and were burning incense to it for this bronze serpent that Moses had made in the wilderness.
Right.
Was it Josiah? He destroyed it?
Yes. Yeah,
so,
I believe so.
The idea is like what is that applicable to our topic?
Yeah.
Okay. I gotta see if I can find that now.
So, I mean, I just don't think that, the whole idea that icons should be used or anything like that, I think it's against Torah.
Okay, I found it. So this is I thought it was first. It's 2 Kings. 2 Kings, and it says in the 3rd year of Hoshea, son of Elah, king of Israel, Hezekiah the son of Ahaz. So it was Hezekiah. This is 2 Kings 18. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, according to all that his father David had done. He removed the high places and broke the pillars, cut down the Asherah. He broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made. For until those days, the people of Israel had made offerings to it, and the kata, that's from burnt incense to it. And it was called Nehushtan.
So check this out.
So
go ahead.
Hezekiah, if that's not, destroying iconoclasm, then what is,
Yeah. By the way, just as a side, I've told this story before. A couple years ago in my sukkah, I put up a frame. All the kids and my wife, they put up, different pictures and stuff like that, and of barley and apples and all sorts of different things. We have pictures of the family in there. I took a frame, I put a white piece of paper in it, put it up, and then I put the verse under it that said, "No stately form or majesty that we should look upon." I thought that was really clever.
I think it is.
Christina, I didn't realize that your group is going through Acts. It's interesting that we're in the exact same chapter right now.
Cool.
You should let me know what you're using to go through Acts. We can exchange notes. Okay, let's go back to my notes here. What time is it? How are we doing on time? We're doing all right on time. Okay. I've been told... Okay, this is an interesting question. We've already talked a little bit about the Lord's Supper. I've been told Easter is Passover by Protestants and Catholic friends. However, When I look at the edicts passed by emperors and Pope Victor, if Easter is Passover, why were the Quatrodecimans under threat of death for continuing to keep Passover in the manner of the Jews? Ephesian bishop Polycrates kept the tradition in the manner of John the disciple. That could be argued. Yes, I understand that. Okay, let's just say that that's true. Do you think these kinds of edicts would have been passed had the disciples still been alive? There's a lot going on in this. I'm not sure if the actual question, if the disciples were still alive, is a valid question. Only because I think that the disciples were certainly still celebrating the festivals.
Yeah.
So, let's just start from the beginning. I've been told that Easter and Passover by the Protestants and Catholic friends, that Easter is Passover by my Protestant and Catholic friends. This is an interesting thing within the Torah movement. You got people who say, "Oh, Easter is the pagan festival of Ishtar." I don't think that we have any evidence of this. In fact, I think that if I know that this is not a popular view within the Torah movement. I think that if we look at the progression of the church celebrating what has become known as Easter, which, by the way, was the German word of the month. Ishtar is the name of the month, like we would say January or February. And over in most of the world, Easter is still called anyone, Pascha. So the point is that the progression that we have, it's not like the Christians were like, okay, we hate the Jews, so let's look at our pagan roots. Ah, yes, we celebrate this festival to the god Ishtar, and we're going to just celebrate that and call it Easter and celebrate that as Jesus' birth. That's not what happened. There's no evidence whatsoever for that at all. Now, granted, I understand that the idea of bunnies and eggs are more controversial than the bunnies. Obviously, the bunnies, I understand that this can be pagan in nature. I'm not saying that there isn't some paganism that could have seeped in. But ultimately, the celebration of Pascha or Easter by the Christians came from the celebration of the Last Supper, which was Passover. And the traditions that went along with it, for much of the time, and even into our modern time, still attach themselves in some way to Passover. Now, granted, we have things like the Quatrodeciman debate, whether or not Easter or Pascha should be celebrated on the same day that the Jews celebrate the Passover, which is Nisan 14. This was a huge debate. And ultimately, I don't think it was right for the church to do this. And I don't think that the mindset behind it was correct either. They wanted to separate themselves from the Jews because the Jews, in their view, not only killed Christ, but also rejected Christ. And so they wanted to do everything possible to separate themselves.
And it started creating or solidifying, standardizing a liturgy.
Right. Yes.
Right? The emergence of
Yes.
what we call the Haggadah, comes as a response. And this is Israel Yuval writes about this. So in other words, you've got an argument. We celebrate, like early apostles. We celebrate Passover. Yeah, but we celebrate Passover that Yeshua teaches us too. And we want you to accept Yeshua. We don't accept Yeshua, but we still hold to the Passover. So that all of a sudden starts to split up.
So the question in the chat room is, didn't Constantine and following emperors forbid the church to observe Passover? Didn't they fiddle with the dates to make sure they were separate? Yeah, this is the Quatrodeciman debate. So the debate was, should we celebrate Pascha on the 14th of Nisan, or should it be on the nearest Sunday? In other words, Christ wrote, this is the mindset. This is not my view, okay, but this is the mindset of what was going on. Christ died on a Friday, which is true, by the way. This is pretty much I know that there's all this debate over this, but there's no debate on it. The scriptures are very clear. Christ dies on a Friday. He rises on a Sunday. So the church says,
but when we say that, we are making a point that we understand there are people in the larger messianic realm that have explored all sorts of other ways.
Yeah, I understand that people are wrong on this, but that's not the point. I mean, I'm not trying to be a jerk about it, but people are wrong.
Yeah, no.
And then there are people who are right. And the people who are right believe that Yeshua died and know that Yeshua died because the scriptures say so on a Friday and that he rose on a Sunday. Okay, so with that settled, the question that the church fathers, quote unquote church fathers, were dealing with was, do we celebrate the Passover or the resurrection of Christ on the day he rose, which would be a Sunday, or do we celebrate it on the date he rose or the date that he was crucified, which would be the Jewish Passover? The answer that they came up with was, let's separate from the Jews. Let's fix it to a Sunday because that's when he rose. Hence, this is why, and let's never celebrate it on the same time that the Jews celebrate it because essentially they're Christ killers was basically the thought pattern behind it. Now, was this anti-Semitic? Yes. Yes, it was. There was anti-Semitism certainly that was wrapped up in this. There's no doubt about it. But the point is that, yes, there was this idea of let's separate from the Jews and we're going to fix it to a Sunday. Was this right biblically? Absolutely not. So, but the point is that there's this notion within the Torah movement. Oh, Easter is 100% pagan. It came from a pagan celebration of Ishtar. There is no evidence for this at all. In fact, the evidence actually points to the Jewish celebration of Passover, Christians wanting to celebrate something but not wanting to be seen as Jews, and moving this celebration to a fixed day of Sunday instead of a fixed day of Nisan 14, and then expanding out from there. It doesn't come from a pagan celebration. Now, are there pagan elements that might have come in later? That's possible. However, the idea that eggs were, a fertility sign that was brought in because of that can be debated. There is, even the early Eastern Orthodox have literature on eggs being a sign of resurrection. So I'm not saying that that's where it came from, but I'm saying that these points are debatable. That's all I'm saying, is that it is debatable. So when you hear people spouting off, oh, this comes from the fertility celebration of Ishtar, who came down the river in an egg and hatched, and her symbol was a bunny. I'm sorry, we just don't have there's no evidence of that. There's late evidence. You can go to Hislop and find that. Okay, we are so in the weeds right now. I don't even know where we're at. This is what happens. This is what happens, folks. Okay, let's go back to my notes. I think we got one more. I think we can come up with one more. There's two more things on my list that we could talk about. We never ever did talk about Jubilees and Enoch. We don't have to do that today. Okay. This is an interesting one from our good friend PJ, who we love very much. PJ writes in and says, recently I feel like I've noticed a growing segregation of the elderly within churches. It caught my attention when I was listening to Todd Friel discuss this issue. I watched that as well, which I'll add the link below, blah, blah. So my question is this: can you guys discuss what this commandment looks like in a community? Leviticus 19:32 from the ESV says, you shall stand up before the gray head and honor the face of an old man, and you shall fear your God. I am the Lord. End quote of Bible passage.
I love that commandment.
So do I.
And I mean, the basic ways, if you're sitting, you're sitting talking and an elder comes in, you stand up and you go shake their hand or give them a hug or acknowledge them, that's a simple thing.
He goes on, he says, so often I see within churches a disregard for elderly people, elderly authority, and elderly advice. Should there be distinctions like an elderly Bible study and youth Bible study? I'm in my 20s, and I know that I've experienced times when I've tried sharing audio clips of elderly people teaching God's word. And
Wait, this is separate from PJ's.
Is this
PJ's
PJ's?
PJ's
He's
not
not
20.
20, in his 20s. I was going to say.
Sorry, PJ, but
P-
you're older than me, my friend.
PJ was
We know
was
that.
in his 20s when he was rocking the star leotard back in the 80s.
Okay, so yeah, that must be. But anyway, it's a great point. Yes.
Yeah, so I
wanna
got
honor
a
our
lot to
elders.
say about this actually. First of all, the question of how do we observe this commandment in Leviticus 19:32? I think it's important for us to let our children know that elders in the community, and not necessarily appointed elders, but that the elderly people in the community have a lot of wisdom,
Right.
and that they need to respect the fact that they have been through a lot more than we have. This was something my father tried to teach me when I was, I think society always has this idea of, oh, kids in their 16, I wish I was 16, then I'd know it all. Right? I mean, that's and many times, especially in our society, that's the truth, is that the teenagers feel like they know better than anyone else. But I think that some of that has to do with how we raise our children to view those who are older than them. And I think that this even comes even within a somewhat of a pecking order of age within siblings. In other words, my 8-year-old son, he's 7, my 7-year-old son is going to outweigh the younger children slightly in opinions because he's older. In other words, your brother's older than you. Respect him. And once we get into the elderly people, I think that there should be a very strong respect and whatnot from our children, as I believe Rob has already said. When it comes to elderly Bible studies, I think, why would you want to take all the wisdom of the people who are older and segregate it away from the people who are younger who need that wisdom?
Yeah, that's why, at Heart of Messiah, we try to have, there's times where a parent needs to take a kid out for a little bit or something, but generally,
Sure.
We encourage families to stay together during the whole service.
Exactly.
So you have, and there's discussion elements in there. There's worship. We do have special stuff for the kids, for our community. We have a little basket full of little kid musical instruments, like little clappers and egg shakers and tambourines, and they come around and they grab their little instrument and do a little parade, and then they put it back. So we do stuff that's specific for the kids, but it's everything we do from there to worship to oneg and to the message is open and welcome for all the generational slices.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think honoring the elders for their, especially, we meet people that walked with the Lord like more than I've been, a lot longer than I've been alive. Like there's someone who's, whom I love dearly, he's been a believer since 1965. He turns 80 this year. I'm like, oh, you're just old enough to have, where Moses had the burning bush visitation there. You're ready to go to Egypt now, and you've got another 40 years of wilderness wandering ahead. Yeah, but
there's
it's amazing.
a question that is, it's obviously, I hope it's obviously sarcastic in some way, but it says, what do you do when the elders in your church are pacifistic hippie Christians? I mean, the fact is that I don't think we need to necessarily agree with everything that an older person says. That's not what we're saying.
Yeah, that's not what the commandment is. The commandment is not to agree with everything an elder tells you,
But the point is that there's still some wisdom there, right? Just the fact that you've been on earth for...
Got to listen for it. You just got to listen for it.
Exactly.
And be patient and have a servant's heart.
All right. Well,
servant's heart.
As everyone can tell from this show, we need you to write in and talk to us. Send your questions in. Send your comments in. We got, let's see here. Our comment line is 253-465-3205. 253-465-3205. Our email address, chegg, that's CHEGG, @torahresource.com. go ahead and send us your emails. Christina, I didn't realize that you guys were in Axe. You can write me an email and tell me what you guys are using. I'd be interested to know about it. Torah Resource has produced this show along with our other producers. You can go to Torah Resource. Hopefully, we're going to launch this site very, very soon. And once we do, it's going to be a lot easier to find stuff. I cannot wait for that. Yeah. And anything else you want to say before we go?
Nope. We thank you guys for all your support and feedback, and we're always in prayer that what we do with our little conversation here is a blessing to y'all.
No doubt. All right, guys. We hope that this conversation has glorified our great God and Savior, Yeshua the Messiah. Why? Well, because Messiah matters.